Hello, social workers, mental health professionals, and change agents. Welcome to another episode of the Social Work Rants podcast. I'm your host, Bash Moreno. Saludos a todos. Greetings, everybody. Thank you for tuning in, tapping in wherever you are watching or listening to the podcast. Appreciate all the love and support. Follow the podcast on social media outlets on Instagram at the Social Work Rants podcast, on Twitter, X, whatever Elon calls it. Elon worry about Tesla, please. Follow on Twitter, X at Social Work Rants, and of course Facebook, aka Meta. Type in the Social Work Rants podcast, hit the like button, and of course the YouTube channel. Hit that red subscribe button. And again, appreciate all the love and support. This podcast is brought to you by Bass City Entertainment, doing business as Bass Marino Consulting, providing financial education for people of color in the sandwich generation. For more info, go to bashmoreno.com. Uh, yeah, and my book is there. My poetry book, Triumph Through Pain: How to Maximize Your Full Potential in Hard Times, is available for purchase on the website. Is also available on Amazon as well. We're gonna talk about books in a bit with my guest. Dr. Damari Bonilla-Rodriguez. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you? I'm happy to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
No, of course. Been a long time coming to connect or reconnect. We met in person, and of course we follow each other through the powerful means of LinkedIn. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So let everybody know who you are and what you do in challenging, excited field of social work.
Yes, I love it. I actually was speaking at a women's conference earlier this week, and I was saying social work is my foundation. When I first went to undergrad as a social work major, I remember meeting my first Latina doctora. She was a doctor of social work, and she was the person that said it's okay to ask for help. And that was such a foreign concept to me. I just couldn't understand hearing that, right? So, social work has helped me understand people, love the idea of investing in people and building up people. And that's one of the passion areas that you and I have in common. And so I was born and raised in El Barrio, New York City, and have lived in Bushville, Pennsylvania, in the Poconos for 17 years now. Uh, Grew up camp Poconos with my family. My husband grew up camping in the Poconos with his family. And one trip that we were out here for, he said we should move over here. And I was like, we should move to camp? He's like, it's not camp. People live out here. And so we did want to access the home ownership dream. And houses in the city were so expensive. So we bought property here and we built a house. And when we had our twins a couple years later, we weren't worried about space. We're like, oh, we have plenty of space in our house, but also fell in love with the need for the work that individuals like you and I do, the work that individuals in our network do, which is allow for representation, which is serve as a voice for those that are not able to speak for themselves because of language barriers or socioeconomic status or citizenship status, right?
Mhm.
Those that deal with very real issues that sometimes people ignore, like not being able to read and write, right? Because we do
Mhm.
have members of our society that are illiterate, and we're able to provide, because of our backgrounds, that support for them. And on the higher levels, we're able to push for fair policies and equity and ensuring that they're not left out when important decisions are being made. So I've had the opportunity to serve as an elected and appointed official in my community, in my region, across the state. And I think part of the success there has been that I worked in the nonprofit sector where I traveled across the country serving as an internal consultant, which allowed me to see the geographic differences, needs, highlights, if you will, right? About, one state versus another, and even cities within particular states. What's going on, what are the needs, where are the gaps in services, and be able to use that lens in my own state where between the 2000 the 2010 census and the recent census, there was the most growth in Latinos in Pennsylvania of all
Mm-hmm.
states across the country. And we're at almost 1.2 million. So being able to realize the potential of this growing population, and how do we ensure that Latino students have a voice in the education system? And how do we ensure that Latinos that came from Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria are able to settle in and find work because their licenses for teaching and other services don't automatically transfer? And how to ensure that Latinos had access to Spanish language materials during the pandemic? I mean, everything from advocacy to actually translating materials when the services weren't there. So that's like, in a nutshell. But happy to be with you and to have the opportunity to have a conversation, because I know that you're also a strong advocate for communities of color and giving people a voice. So it's good to be with like-minded people.
No, yeah, absolutely. And you said a whole word. We're gonna partialize a little bit. So how was it like growing up in Spanish Harlem and then making that transition, to PA? And was that like was that like culture shock for you? Like what was that transition like for you?
Seguro, it definitely was a culture shock. So our country right now, I live in the Pike County part of the Poconos. There is an 8% Latino population, which is a bigger number, than it used to be. Probably not as big as other locations like Philadelphia, Reading, Lancaster. Those cities are at the point where school districts' predominant population is Latino students. So there's not that many, but it's enough that we have Latino businesses, that we have, just seeing people that we didn't see when we moved here 17 years ago. And it was culture shock in a New York Puerto Rican. But to people, my accent was not the norm, right? And so having to explain where you're from, having to work through some of the stereotypes that exist. Even still, I was on a Facebook group a few days ago, and I was seeing some of the comments about, those people, the New Yorkers that come here. So some of it is racially and ethnically motivated, right? And some of it is geographically motivated. Oh, those New Yorkers, they bring trash, they bring this, they bring that, they're ghetto. It doesn't matter that I have the highest degree, right? I have a doctorate, for goodness sake, but there are people that look at my name or my identities and tried to undermine. And that spilled into elected office when I had to explain myself often, or, when I am passionate about issues and, I'm advocating, it's like, oh, you're arrogant, or you're this, or you're that. And there's the name calling, because people don't understand that I'm passionate because there's so much need. I'm passionate because there are students sitting in our classrooms that don't see administrators that look like them. So in our district that serves almost 7,000 students, we have one African American administrator, one African American assistant principal who falls into the administrator category as well. And there are no Hispanics and no Asians in those positions. That does not mean that I'm not able to do good work with Caucasian administrators, but it does mean that students don't see themselves in the highest positions that are making decisions for them, for their educational journey. So I think all of that is culture shock, right? When you grow up having teachers with last names like yours, or that can say, a word or two in Spanish or a lot more. And then you come to a place where you don't have that. And by the time my boys graduated fifth grade, one of them had never had a teacher of color. One of them had one African American female teacher in second grade.
Well, yeah, I experienced something like that. I mean, I did have a Hispanic teacher in third grade, but then it was like few and far between. Like, wasn't until like sixth grade, well, fifth grade and sixth grade, I kind of see that just because it was just mostly Hispanic African American schools, so like most of the staff, like there was a good mixture. Of course, being in the Bronx, that's not always the case to a lot of, but I kind of see like fifth grade without that. It's yeah, it's definitely a challenge, and it's definitely like, and let's be frank, like white people want to play in your face, or like for whatever the reason, and yeah, I do see the Facebook comments, the uh, uh in my town, and kind of like blame like the New Yorkers or like
Yeah.
people from DC, Jersey, like coming in into the town, and it's like, yeah, because it's expensive where we live at, so we
Right.
need.
People are looking for access, right, to home ownership, to a quality life, to being outdoors. I mean, where we are, there are waterfalls and mountains and trees. I grew up on the 13th floor in the projects of New York City in NYCHA. I could see the East River from my window, but most people can't, right? So being outdoors and being able to enjoy nature and the environment, and even, you know, delve into environmental advocacy. That wasn't something I learned growing up in New York City, but I came here and understood that there is a need to hold businesses accountable to not pollute the waters, to not, ruin the natural resources that we have. Those are areas that we don't grow up knowing about because it's not the way of life in New York City, if you will. But when you move somewhere for that kind of life, you want to advocate for it. You're going to be a partner in the work. I'm not here to take something from anybody, and you're not there to take something from anybody. So it's interesting the way people view you based on where you grew up, where you came from.
Mm. Yeah, the natives, they're very protective. Well,
Yes.
the quote unquote natives of where they live at, because Native Americans are the real natives, but the people who are born in places where we live at now, like, very protective, like, and they
Yeah.
give you the side eye like real quick.
Yeah, we're all transplants, right? The transplants.
Yeah, the transplant. um, but yeah, you said you hold like hold the no elected officials, like all this, like how you went from like doing all this great macro work that that you're doing. What was that transition like for you?
That was an interesting transition. So I've always loved politics. I'll preface with that. When I was in New York City, I volunteered in high school for my local assembly member for his campaign, and I've always loved it. It's just something that fuels me because I know that there's an opportunity to give that voice to people, to do right by people, to ensure access for people. The problem is that once individuals, some are corrupt before they go there, but once individuals get into office, sometimes they become corrupt because of money, because of deals, because of, you know, under the table agreements, if you will, that kind of takes the process and derails it. But I've always loved the political sector as an opportunity to help people. So when I came here, I didn't think that I would run for office. I always thought I would run for office in New York City. And I worked for the city council, state assembly, state senate. I'd worked in the different branches. I didn't think I would run here for some of the reasons we touched on, right? Just you being an outsider,
Mm.
seen as a transplant, and some of those challenges. But when I signed my boys up for kindergarten, I had an experience where I was not treated fairly by someone in the central office. And there was an assumption by looking at me in my jeans, my t-shirt, and my flip-flops. And I was asked about my educational level and accomplishments. And I love the question because I actually have the highest educational credentials, right? And there's a sort of a stigma or an assumption that if you're from a particular racial or ethnic background or a particular community, that you don't have these credentials. And so I use that as an opportunity to gain a foundation that put me in a position to be a voice in my community. So I ran a 7-week write-in school board campaign. I was not going to win. I wasn't on the ballot. There wasn't enough time to reach people. I wasn't known, but it wasn't about winning. It was about spending those 7 weeks as people paid a little bit more attention to the general election that was coming up. Because I'll sidebar for a quick minute and say that People of color often do not vote in non-presidential elections. So last year it was hard to get people out versus this year. And people of color do not often vote in non-presidential primary elections. So I lost my reelection in a primary election last year because people that look like me and talk like me and or understand the challenges were not out there voting. So this was going into the November election, and I knew I would have some attention. And I was going around saying to people, parents and guardians, your voice is important. Your voice matters. You need to be engaged at this level to ensure that your student has access to fair policies, to fair treatment, to resources, to the kind of educational experience that takes into consideration their needs. Because I have twins, my boys are 14, and their needs are very different. They look alike because they're identical, but their needs are different, right? Their personalities are different. And so their challenges are different. They cannot go into a classroom and be treated exactly the same because one might succeed and one might not.
Right.
So I used that opportunity. And then the local Democratic Party asked me to run for state representative the following year. I still did not have what I needed. That was in January. But I believe that everybody should defend their seat. I don't think you should just get to stay in office forever because you were elected. And so I said, okay, nobody would run, and I did. And it was a great opportunity to meet the community, to understand that 20 minutes away from each other, there is a gated community and there's a farm. And gerrymandering, which is a topic that we don't learn about in New York City either,
Right,
and the way that districts, right, are created and cut out greatly impacts that experience to have a farm and a gated community where the dynamics and the issues are different, but they're in the same district and they have the same representative. Somebody's going to get left out. So that gave me an opportunity to build up my following. And then when I ran for school board, I was elected. I was the first Hispanic elected in my school district in November of 2019. And I served a 4-year term, which closed out in just December of this past year. So it was definitely an experience.
How how was being part of the school board? Because I got my own issues with my current school board, and
Let me find out. We're
a
going to
lot of people.
train you to run.
No, I don't want to. I don't want to run because the rest of the people, like there's certain people on the actual board, like they drive a lot of people nuts, and it's just a lot that's happening within my community, and there's a big vote that's like coming up, and it's like potential. Well, my neighborhood community is expanding so much that to the point that they need like new buildings to for all the kids that's trying to enroll within the next few years, and it's just like a little bit of overcrowding is starting in a couple of the schools. So it's like we need more money and we need property tax money from the community, and of course there's a lot of pushback from the community of like my taxes are already going up or have gone up already, and I don't got kids anymore in the district, so like it's a lot happening.
Oh, there is a lot happening. I was looking over to my side because it's usually very quiet here, and there was a motorcycle outside, and I can tell it's not my husband. I'm saying, who in the world? I felt like I was in the city again. So I'll tell you a couple of quick things. As I think school board, quick and dirty, right? The school board has more power over homeowners and students and their families on a day-to-day basis than state level and federal offices do. The school board determines, as you just alluded to, the taxes. The school board determines, so it's the property taxes, it's the policies and curriculum in the schools, it's the budget for the district. All of it impacts individuals. So we do often hear individuals who are frustrated because they don't have students in the school system, and they pay the same taxes, and what does that look like, what informs that decision. That's where the state comes in, because if the state does not give enough funding to the school districts have to raise taxes, and the school districts have the opportunity to raise taxes every year to a certain index. So the state will determine what's the maximum that they can raise it to, and then they determine whether they are going to raise it or not. The school districts have an administration team that runs the day-to-day, but the school board votes and accepts who's going to be hired into those positions, who is going to be consulting, who's going to be doing everything there, right? Everything goes through the school board. So sometimes people don't realize, sometimes people don't even vote. When they go down ballot, there's the president, there's the vice president, there are all of these offices. Sometimes people don't even vote for school board because they don't realize the power and the impact of the school board. So I would urge everyone that has a school board in their area to look up that information. Some areas like Philadelphia, and other big cities, the school board is appointed by the mayor, and they have what they call mayoral control. So that runs a little bit different, but in that case, you should be known and engage and be part of it. Every taxpayer, homeowner, every individual that lives in the district has the opportunity to speak on the issues. You do not often get community members speaking on the issues at school board meetings. People have to go there and speak because your voice has to be heard. What we saw during the pandemic was a lot of politics spilling into the school board meetings in public. And you had, groups that were extremists that were and still are in some areas, against the LGBTQIA plus community, against affirmative action, which unfortunately we saw what happened at the Supreme Court level, against diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, against particular books and the book banning, right? I fought during those 4 years because I started my term in December of 2019. So my whole term was pandemic, which meant that all the things I came there to do, I had to adjust to a lens of how do I do that, like increasing communication opportunities with the community, right? I have to do that through this pandemic lens. I chaired the education committee when I was on the school board for the entire 4 years that I was there, educational programs and resources. I served as the school board representative to the Colonial Intermediate Unit 20, which is special education. In Pennsylvania, all of special education goes through intermediate units. When I went there, I was the first person of color, I was the first Hispanic, and I was the youngest, the only one under 50. And I was there for 4 years. I served as vice president in my second, third, and fourth years. So here's what happens when we are at the table, when we use our voice to speak up, when we educate people, even if it's exhausting, because it is exhausting to have to keep explaining who I am, how do I identify, how do students like me need to be treated, right? It is exhausting. But when we do that, we rise to the top because we are there to advocate for every student. I'm not just there to advocate for Latino students. I am going to talk about the gaps in serving those students. I am going to talk about the deficits, but I'm also going to talk about the opportunities. So one of the issues that came up in a meeting was a white mom saying to me, "You just want my white kids to feel guilty for being white." And I addressed it and I said, no, I don't. I actually want your white kids to understand how my Puerto Rican kids live and interact. And I want my Puerto Rican kids to understand how your white children live and interact because they live in the same community. This is their community. And they have to be able to thrive together for the community's sake, right? We can't be living in these silos and in this way that separates people by skin color, race, ethnicity, or other identities, right? Because we live in the same damn community, so we have to work together. So there's a level of ongoing work and effort when you're in places like the school board that you have to be working on because a lot of the people that are there are older white men. The data shows that most school boards across the country are older white men. So I'll give you a quick picture of Pennsylvania. There are 500 school districts, 9 elected school board directors for each district, which makes 4,500 representatives across the Commonwealth. Out of those, there were 135 school board directors, according to a study conducted by the Pennsylvania School Board Association. When I left my seat in December, there became 134. It's less than 3% of the total population of school board directors across the Commonwealth. Yet we have so many Latino students across the state. In my own community, 68% of the students identify as Black, Hispanic, Asian, or mixed race, students of color. But there was an all-white school board when I came in, and there's an all-white school board now that I'm not there. So how can individuals, yes, you can be an ally, yes, you can care about students, yes, you can understand to some extent, but how can individuals who do not live in the same experience as those students create policies that take into consideration the experience of those students?
Right, of course. Yeah, it does it's a lot. I've heard some things about PA as a whole, and this was before Governor Shapiro took over, which happened recently within the last couple of years. Just personal friends having like bad experiences with racism out in PA, and racism like is everywhere. But she really had it like really bad where she was at, living a few years in PA. So I'm not surprised by the statistics. It's just unfortunate, when you have pockets and people moving in, migrating from other states and just trying to live a better life. Like we all deserve
Right.
no better housing, just as humans. Housing is a
Yeah.
human right, and is part of our hierarchy of needs as human beings. So it's just
Yeah.
for racism to still come to play, and just the far right extremism that's been taking place since at least 2016, 2015, 2016, since Agent Orange decided to run for president. And of course, his disastrous 4 years of terms, and he's still running amok currently. So yeah, it's a lot that's
Yeah.
happening.
What it did though was, you touched on a bunch of different things, and I'll say, yes, racism still exists and it's unfortunate. And I think it it's always existed, but it was
Mm,
sort of dormant. And what it
mm,
did in 2016 with the election outcome was give an open door to people that had been dormant to be able to speak publicly about their racism,
mm,
sexism, misogyny, right? Their isms, because they
right.
had been quiet. And I was actually on the ballot in 2016 because I ran for state representative. So I was down ballot on the Democratic ticket, and it was such an experience. I was actually the only Hispanic on a state ballot in Pennsylvania that was new in that year. So there were two others out of Philadelphia who were running for reelection for state representative. There was nobody running for state senate, definitely not for the U.S. Senate or any of the other higher offices. But there were a couple of us on that ballot, and I was the new one that had never run before. And I was the first Hispanic to make a state ballot in Pike and Monroe counties, because some of the county some of the elected offices run across county lines. And this was just a few years ago. In that same time period, there was an English only bill at the state legislature level in Pennsylvania where they wanted to force everyone to speak English only in public places. So it allowed all of this to reemerge in a way
Mm,
that it had been sort of suppressed, right, because of the civil rights movement, because of all of the advocacy and the work that had been done in recent decades. And to the experiences that your friends have shared, I served under the previous governor's administration as a Latino commissioner for his Latino commission, which was a statewide commission. I represented the Poconos for 6 years under Governor Tom Wolf, and I chaired the statewide education committee. And I had the opportunity to travel throughout Pennsylvania working with school districts, and the racism, blatant mistreatment that Latino students and other students of color as well, but predominantly Latino students that had language barriers, the racism that they were facing was insane and unacceptable. And, I did partner with the Human Rights Commission and several other state agencies and our commission to bring light to those issues and say, this is not okay. School districts have been sued by different courts and different levels because of that treatment. So that's where our work comes in, right? That's where the social work background comes in, where we allow ourselves to be the vehicle that speaks for people, that fights for people, that empowers people to fight for themselves and with you. And we're in this together. And even if we lose today, we have to keep this alive and going, because we cannot allow for our young people to be caught up and have to continue to experience these isms and the lack and the disenfranchisement that we've experienced. And that's what
right.
motivates me every day. It's like, oh, the hell to the no, my boys are not going to have to experience all this, right? I'm fighting for them. And sometimes it takes us getting to positions of authority and being at those tables, even for a short period of time, to be able to build up our own power, our political power, our leadership power, our following, to the fact that community members who maybe never came out and voted or never came out and participated are saying, you know what, if you're running, I'm going to come out and do that. Sometimes the opposite happens. Sometimes they see you, and me, I'm loud. I'm not going to apologize to anybody. I've worked my butt off to be where I am, and I always work harder and smarter. So sometimes people sit back, oh, she's got it. You know, la doctora, she's got it, but I can't do it alone. So there has to be this constant reminder to people that we're in this together, that regardless of how you identify, we have to be able to work together in communities for the community to thrive, for us and our families to thrive, to leave the world better than when we were born into it.
Right, right, of course, and even something simple as a school board was, coming from New York City. Like, the heck is that? You just deal with New York City. You just had the chancellor, and then the mayor appoints the chancellor. The chancellor makes the decisions, and yeah,
Right.
each district had like a superintendent, but they still had to answer to the chancellor, and just any decisions for the school closure comes from the top, from the chancellor, and that's it. And then just coming school board and just hearing, like, seeing their meetings, and for me, they talk a lot of nonsense that doesn't play in day out
Yeah.
of the kids' needs and stuff like that. So it's like,
Yeah.
it's fascinating to see that, and experience that, and going to town hall meetings, or all the stuff that's been happening recently, and just kind of, I'm still trying to get my feet wet within, like, the community, like, 3 years later, and just like, so much change that has happened, as more and more stores are opening up, and people moving in constantly, and just new construction is just a lot happening. So much that Delaware doesn't seem to can't keep up fast enough.
Yeah, we experienced that here in this area as well, because when we moved here, a lot of the businesses, gas stations, restaurants, stores that are here now were not here. And people don't realize that the school board votes on many of those things. New areas, new businesses, locations, building, construction. There's the zoning piece, but the school board has a role in what happens there as well. And that's why it's important. And you're right, it is a different world, but it's important that if you live in an area with a school board, that you familiarize yourself. If you cannot go to meetings, read the minutes, watch the recording if there's a recording, and familiarize yourself with what does the school board do, what's in their jurisdiction, how can I reach the school board to share my opinion and back it up. I always, when I would go to school board meetings, and still, if I'm going there to speak, I always have the information with me. This is what I think is an issue. This is why I think it's an issue. This is the example of how I think it will play out negatively for our district. They're going to vote, however, they're going to vote regardless, because many of them have already made a deal before they got to that table. Many of them have already decided before they got there. For some of them, there's a kickback or some kind of benefit that they're going to have by making that decision or voting a particular way. So sometimes, but what you do is you trigger for others in the community, and maybe for the school board members that haven't decided, right? You could trigger something that moves the community in a positive direction. So it's important advocacy.
No, no, definitely is advocacy. All those transferable skills that we hear,
Exactly.
kind of
Yeah.
put into practice.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Now, talking about transferable skills, I see you've been doing a lot of speaking engagements. How for people listening or watching, like, and they want to get into doing speaking engagements, how have those opportunities come up for you?
That's a great question. Actually, I've been asked that a lot lately. So, one of the things that I've always enjoyed is talking, talking with anybody and everybody. But seriously, in terms of the professional sector, is really talking with people, not just to teach, right? Because there are times I come in as the expert on a particular topic, and you're supposed to kind of, but I always say I'm here to facilitate discussion. I'm here to learn from the people that are here, just like you're here to learn from me, and you should be here to learn from each other. Because when we talk and when these dialogues happen, we learn, we grow, we push ourselves, we feel excited and go out and do the work. And so I've had the opportunity to serve in the nonprofit sector as an internal consultant for a national organization that allowed me to travel throughout the different states and cities talking to the boards, talking to different parts of the organization, and talking about diversity, and just kind of bringing training sessions. And I've been able to transfer the skill of being a trainer to being a speaker. And so as I go to events in the community, as I connect with people on LinkedIn, you mentioned that earlier, and our own connection, and others, there are conversations that come up and they'll reach out to me. So I just gave a keynote for a women's conference in Reading, Pennsylvania, which is about 2 hours away from me, and has a very high Latino population right now. And someone connected me to the person that led that conference. And as we were just connecting, and as we were talking, and she was asking me about my background, she said, "You would be a fabulous speaker for our conference." And so she said, "Would you send me your bio and your website or LinkedIn?" And I did, and she shared it with her committee. And they came back and said, "Would you be able to speak about breaking the glass ceiling and claiming credit for your ideas?" And I was like, "I would love to speak about that, because we don't have that conversation enough publicly."
Mm-hmm.
And so then I put together a description for them about the lens that I would bring, and they loved it. And so use your connections as an opportunity to open up some of those spaces that you can be a speaker for. It doesn't have to be before hundreds of people. I've done events where there's 10 people. I've done events where there's 100 people. I've done events where there's thousands of people. If you have something to share, if you're passionate about something, use those networks and have those conversations, and just even say to people, "I'm interested in sharing, about this research paper that I wrote, or this book that I read," or as you talked about, your book, and anything that is an area for you to be able to inspire others in and create momentum with.
Right. I like that. That's a gem. A couple gems there. Obviously, definitely using your network, and you mentioned LinkedIn is Instagram. Like I think
Mhm.
2020 kind of like we were all like home or wherever we were. We weren't outside, so it kind of like really just sending messages, and like whoever responded, like, all right, great, and kind of like meeting that way, and using the podcast as a networking tool to
Yeah.
meet people, and see boots on the ground. Like you mentioned, all the boots on the ground work that you've done and continue to do, kind of give more of what you're doing in Pennsylvania. Give a good example of more of the other cities in Pennsylvania. So stuff like that, like I wanted to like kind of use the podcast to see like what is really happening that I'm not going to get on local news, or even national news for that matter, and see
Right.
what's really happening in our communities that affect our communities. And I want to piggyback earlier what you said regarding just the Latino population, and kind of helping about them out, because even I experience and still experience working with Latino population that moved into like our areas during the pandemic. So they're literally coming into the country, and then they're coming into our communities, and it's like gotta help them enroll into school, and they got kids, and registering them, and then like basically having they'll get stuff from the district, but like they couldn't read or write in Spanish, so literally had to do outreach and go to their homes, and like, this is such and such is happening on this day, and it's happening this day, you got to do it on this day, and kind of do home visits in the midst of a pandemic, and just because there was no other way, so they would know what's happening, know with their kids, and schoolwork. So it's like those, and that continues to happen, to this day, as people are continuing to migrate, um, not only state to state, but still coming in through no fault of their own, with the idiot governor in Texas, what he's doing, and kind of things are still happening, and we kind of still have to think outside the box. How can we really affect, and help people who are really in need, and unfortunately, you can't send an email in Spanish because they're not gonna understand it,
Right.
or and still like we talk about school boards. Like I think about the pockets of the Hispanics that we have here, who some of them moved in within the last 4 years, and like, what are there? Do they even know what's happening? What the district is doing about that? So, um, it's just a lot, and you could peel layers and layers of everything, and everything all intertwines together. And a lot of my MSW students who listen to the podcast to kind of understand that yeah, like the partialization and just peeling the layers is so much that's happening all at the same time that affects the clients that we serve or that we're trying to serve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the only thing I would add to that's all right. I think the connection is, you talked about peeling back the layers and intertwine. The connection is the communication piece and ensuring that, as you talked about, people have access to information in their native language, so they're able to understand what's going on when it's going on. So I think the communication piece, and then just access, right? That's where we come in, because a lot of individuals do not have opportunity to communicate effectively, connect with the powers that be, as you talked about, right? And then therefore they don't have access to resources, to the information, to being able to get the support. And here in Pennsylvania, there were many Latino students that weren't starting school until the first grade, because when they were going to register their kids without having the knowledge and being able to communicate, they were being turned away, and they were having to pay for childcare for all of kindergarten when their students are entitled to be in school for kindergarten,
Right.
and being turned away because in some places they were being told there was no space. Well, it's your job to find a seat for students. Kindergarten is not, it's not a question. If they want to be there, they can be there, because our gradings at the system starts in kindergarten, right? So it's not, it's in between. It's not optional and it's not mandatory. So if you choose not to send your child, fine, but it is available. It's not like Head Start, which is very limited. Kindergarten is available to every student that wants it or that their family wants it, but they weren't having access.
That
So
that's
it
that's
gets
insane.
it gets intense. Yeah, it gets intense.
So on a lighter note, you have a book. It, you can talk about what's the name of it. How can what's it about? How can we get our hands on
Yeah, on a lighter note, it
it?
only took me it only took me a year and a half to get it out. It's interesting because I want for us to be able to debunk for people like us that authorship is possible and is within reach, right? And for me, it took long because there were times along the way that I put it down because I was focused on the reelection and I was focused on this and I was focused on that. And I didn't remember that this was my voice too. Right. And so I finally got the first 100 physical copies this weekend. And I cried when I held it because I was like, por fin. So it's a continuation of my doctoral research, if you will, which was about Latina leadership in the United States. And I coined a new term called modern Marianismo. So Marianismo is the way that in the Latino culture, we identify the behavior of women, for Latina women, right? They're sacrificial, they take care of everyone, they put others before themselves, they're nurturers, etc. And that's the counter of machismo, right? Where you're supposed to be the breadwinner, the strong one, the tough one, etc. And it addresses the cultural nuances for Latina women. I wanted to put together a conversation from then about Latina leadership that says that we can have aspects of Marianismo, but then we can reject aspects too, right? I can take the parts that I want to accept and leave the parts I don't. I don't have to do this just because it's been passed through generations. And así que te tiene que portar. This is how you have to behave. This is what you have to do. This is how you have to dress. I don't have to do that, right? I can say this is me, this is not me. And then the other two topics that I cover in the book are perfectionism and imposter syndrome, because perfectionism comes when we're trying to meet those expectations that society imposes on us, that the culture imposes on us, and that we impose. Some of it is self-imposed. And you try to do all of those things, and you can't do all of those things well all the time because you're human and we can't be perfect. And then you end up in that imposter syndrome where you're trying to figure out, how can I do better? How come I don't belong? How come there's this like feeling that you're not good, even though you're doing all of these things right. So the book is called Modern Marianismo, its relevance and the connection to imposter syndrome and perfectionism. And in the book, I have a term that I'm reframing that was used in history only twice. And both times it has been used to identify a collaboration between three men who were in power and made this agreement to stay in power by putting together this coalition. And my analogy is that these three ideologies have kept power over women, not just Latina women, but women, right? It looks a little different for women from different racial and ethnic backgrounds, but over women based on societal standards. And that if we can get our heads wrapped around it and say, this is what's been holding me back, I'm going to be working towards moving away from that. I'm going to be working towards overcoming that. It's an ongoing process, but it's a reconciliation of who I choose to be and how I choose to show up as a leader. And, you know, I encourage men to read it as well, to understand how can I be an ally and how can I use my positionality and how can I use my voice to advocate for women, because women still make less than men, right? Women still don't have the same visible roles at, you know, as men. And so, and especially Latina women, right? As we go down the numbers, the women of color make even less. And so it's also an opportunity for men to read it and think about. And I put my own experience in there. And there's one point in the book where, you know, I talk about the expectations and I go, have you ever felt exhausted? Because I have felt exhausted, because I have to be working towards this all the time of, you know, there are times my husband's like, put the toilet brush down. You've already cleaned the toilet. Like, get away from it. You know, and he said to me, go write your book, go do this, go do that. Right. But I'm still sometimes working through those unconscious inside of me, right, internal ideals, and say, no, yes, I love keeping clean toilets, but I can put it down and go write my book. Or I can go deliver a keynote and empower 350 women in Reading. Or I can, you know, buy fast food today and not cook from scratch because I was working all day and my kids are going to be fed, even if it's not made from scratch, right? Those are the negotiations that happen internally and then move externally to allow you to succeed.
No, I love that. Is the book out, or like how can we get copies of the book?
Yeah, so it's finally physically available. So I had it in pre-sale for a couple of months and, you know, sold a good amount of copies thanks to all of those individuals that believed right away and bought it. But now it is available on my website, which is drdarmary-Bonilla-Rodriguez.com. And it's available there, as well as a little deck of cards. There's this mini deck of cards that matches the book, and you don't have to buy it, it's separate, but it has on each card a question that relates to the content in the book. So for example, what is Marianismo, and how do I identify with it or not, right? What is modern Marianismo, and how can I move there, right, where I'm deciding what I accept and don't accept? You know, what are these different ideologies, and just questions that you could use for yourself. Like today, I just don't have the energy to do much, but I'm going to put this little card up and I'm going to ask this question and just think about it. Or I can use it in a group, in conversation. I can use it with my students. I can use it with my family. I can use it with my friends to have these tough conversations that seem still today taboo.
Wow, I love that. That's a great idea.
Thank you.
um, what what else you got going on this year?
Well, I want to travel the country hosting conversations relating to the book. Yes, I want to sell books, but more importantly, I want to facilitate discussions where we talk about the reality that a stay-at-home mother and a woman who's a CEO still have those same experiences and those same internal battles with themselves about, did I cook from scratch enough this week? Did I travel too much this week? Am I a good mother? Am I a good teacher? Am I a good spouse? Am I a good friend? Because we're grappling with all of these different ideologies and dynamics. And so anybody that is interested in hosting an event, I'd love to partner with them and come to the organizations, educational institutions, churches, anybody that feels like we can have this conversation in their community. I want to go. And then also, I'm writing a teen version for the book, which is going to be ages 8 to 14, which is called Modern Marianismo. You don't have to be perfect. Because if we can plant those seeds and debunk some of those ideologies earlier on, by the time those teens get to be you and I, they're going to have a better understanding of that's part of life, that I have to put something aside to be able to do something else and not feel guilty about making decisions that relate to their well-being, their emotional health, their mental health, and that's going to be the best version of themselves.
No, I like that, and it's so needed. As more and more stuff is happening with the kids, and there's more and more,
Yes.
just a lot that you and I, preteen and teenagers, didn't have to like deal
Yes.
with. Even as city kids, like we didn't have to deal with all the stuff that
Yeah.
kids have had to deal with. Currently, the online bullying, just
Yeah.
everything that's currently happening. On top of like world issues that's happening day in day out, and that's currently happening as we speak.
Yeah. Exactly. That's right.
Now, I love that idea of like you going across the country, because I hear it, within my wife, my ex-wife, and just those pressures, and like, kind of like trying to balance work and raising families, and then can I do everything? Do I have to like sacrifice one thing and do this? So yeah, it's very relatable. Obviously being a male in a female dominated space, space of social worker, you hear those conversations, eavesdropping without eavesdropping, and hear like past coworkers talk about that, and just within my own personal spaces. So yeah, it's very relatable, and of course myself raising a little lady myself, and trying to give those foundational tools that she's going to need as she grows up, and try to conquer the world.
Exactly. We're on the
uh,
same page.
where can people find you?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on, as you say, X or Twitter, whatever it's called. I like that. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. I have a personal profile on Facebook, and then also a public figure one. And then my website, DRDAMARYBONILLARODRIGUEZ.com.
Awesome. uh, Dr. Darmary, thank you for your time, taking out the busy schedule out of your busy schedule to come on the podcast.
Thank you for the opportunity and for great conversation, and just the inspiration of how you help everybody get their message out, and you always have a positive attitude, even though I know the work is hard, and it's great to collaborate. So thank you.
No problem. Thank you.